Hi, I'm Megan, and I've got a new podcast I think you're going to love. It's called Confessions of a Female Founder, a show where I chat with female entrepreneurs and friends about the sleepless nights, the lessons learned, and the laser focus that got them to where they are today. And through it all, I'm building a business of my own and getting all sorts of practical advice along the way that I'm so excited to share with you. Confessions of a Female Founder is out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's smart to always have a few financial goals. And here's a really smart one you can set: earning cash back on what you buy every day. With Discover, you can. Get this. Discover automatically matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. Seriously, all of it. Discover trusts you to make smart decisions. After all, you listen to this podcast. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. I asked Batrawy, who reports on the Middle East for NPR, to come on the show and explain this video to me. It was shot in Gaza by a paramedic. There are no people in this video, not up close anyway. Instead, all you see is the road in front of you, which looks like it goes on forever. You're riding in an ambulance, looking through the windshield. There's a fire truck, a whole lot of flashing lights. It's dark.
They were going to rescue people in Rafah because a ground invasion had just been launched into Rafah, and people were being shot as they were trying to flee on foot, and there were airstrikes, and so they were going there to save people.
So the convoy's rolling, and then what happens?
And then they're out. Some of them are outside of the convoy already. You can see them in their reflective gear. And then you hear gunshots, this steady stream of gunshots being shot towards them and them running for cover.
At this point, the ambulance stops, and the paramedic grabs his phone from the dash and jumps out. He starts reciting a prayer. It's called the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith.
And, it was interesting because the only reason I believe we got this video is because it was recovered from his pocket.
The phone.
Right.
Days later, this paramedic was recovered from a mass grave, which leads to all kinds of questions about what the video shows. Israel's admitted that its soldiers opened fire, but initially, they claimed they did so because the ambulances were advancing suspiciously. Then, without presenting evidence, the IDF claimed some of the aid workers here were associated with Hamas. Now they are launching an investigation into what took place. 15 aid workers were killed in total. Some of them were buried with their hands bound. Their vehicles were crushed. It's pretty horrifying that less than a week after a ceasefire deal lapsed, these aid workers were killed. But you seem almost numb to it?
I wouldn't say numb, but this isn't an isolated incident in which aid workers have been killed. There have been over 400 aid workers killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 18 months. The day I'm talking to you today, there was an airstrike on a tent of journalists. And in many of these cases, Israel says that they were targeting someone linked to Hamas or somebody who was a Hamas member, and they blame Hamas for embedding among people. But in the case of the paramedics, the story has shifted drastically since the evidence came out on the video.
Also in this case, the bodies were buried, which is it's literally covering up what happened. Does that strike you too?
Well, the Israelis have an answer for some of that. They say that they removed the bodies and covered them up to keep them from roaming wild dogs, which are feasting upon the corpses of Palestinians across Gaza. We've seen multiple videos of that. They say the cars were moved in order to unblock the road, though I don't think we understand why they were crushed and buried to do that.
Does it seem like things are getting worse?
If you ask people in Gaza, they say something about this time, since the ceasefire was shattered on March 18th, feels different. People are hungrier, they're more exhausted, they've been displaced more times than they can count, they've lost children and they're losing more children. It's like you've survived this long only to be killed at this stage, or only to be orphaned at this stage, or only to lose a limb at this stage. So it feels much more difficult to survive.
Today on the show, it's getting harder to keep people in Gaza alive. We'll explain why. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
This episode is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is a great way to discover the best new styles and elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. The great thing about Saks.com is that it is always open 24 hours a day, which means you can browse from the comfort of your own home. Saks makes it really easy to find your favorite brands, and they offer amazing style inspiration. I'm not exaggerating when I say my jaw dropped at the shearling leather biker jacket I found, and that's not even mentioning the Alice and Olivia sequined mini dress I had my eye on. Whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. So if you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and you want to elevate your personal style, head on over to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration. Can we talk about what's happened over the last 3 weeks as talks over a permanent ceasefire in Gaza stalled? How has Israel gone back into Gaza, and how does the war look different now?
So Israel says it has to go back to war. And by Israel, I mean, the government, the far-right government, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has gone back to war to eliminate Hamas and to free the hostages. But you've seen the protests in Israel probably, right? Where you've seen thousands of people go to the streets and say, return to negotiations. This is only endangering those hostages that are still alive.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think we've heard a clear definition of what eliminate Hamas looks like. We've heard it from President Biden before he left office that Hamas cannot carry out another October 7th, 2023 attack like it did when that attack killed 1,200 people in Israel and took hostages. We have seen their capabilities very degraded, and Israel says that it has smashed and dismantled all of Hamas's brigades and battalions in Gaza.
So you're asking what more is there to destroy?
Well, what does eliminate Hamas look like? What does that mean? To what end do you say the military objectives have been achieved and now there needs to be a transition to the day after, as they call it, to a political transition, to a plan for people that live there? That is really the dilemma. And we've heard even Israeli military officials come out and criticize the return to war and criticize the continuation of war. A colleague of mine at NPR, Daniel, he's working on a piece just looking at reservists, Israeli reservists also being exhausted and not wanting to continue putting their lives on hold for this war, not understanding its objectives anymore. So there's a lot of questions swirling around the futility of this, if you'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I read too about how Israel is going into Gaza. Like before the ceasefire, there's a lot of talk about how Israel had built up a sort of line bisecting Gaza right in the middle. And part of the ceasefire was them withdrawing from that line so people could travel north to south, south to north. But I'm reading now that the IDF seems to be kind of dissecting the enclave into separate districts. So it's an expansion of this division within Gaza itself militarily. Is that something you're seeing as well?
Yes, and they're openly saying what their plans are. They've openly announced this new axis. They're calling it the Marg axis, which bifurcates and separates the major city of Khan Yunis from southern Gaza, where Rafah is. So two major cities. Then there's the Netzarim corridor you're referring to, which separates the north from the south. People can still walk on foot north to south, but cars are not allowed. So movement is very restricted. Aid movements, very, very restricted in Gaza right now, even with the limited aid that is in Gaza. So nothing new has come in. As you know, there's been a blockade for 5 weeks now. Nothing has come in, no food, no fuel, no medical supplies, no tents, nothing.
Hold it. How does that work? I mean, you have a place that's completely reliant on aid, really. So you have 2 million people living there. How do they get food? How do they live?
A lot of them aren't getting food. That's the truth. I mean, they might get one meal a day of expired wheat turned into bread, or canned food like canned corn, things that don't really go bad very, quickly. But they're not getting eggs. They're not getting chicken. They're not getting beef. They're not getting milk. They're not getting yogurts, cheese. They're not getting a variety of fruits and vegetables, only what can be locally grown still. And things are very expensive. When there's a shortage of something, the price goes up. And so what we saw during the 6 weeks when aid was coming in and there was a ceasefire, where prices going down and people being able to find eggs and find those things to eat. And there are some children, for the first time in their lives since they were born, could eat eggs, because it had been like a year and a half where they had never tried eggs, or children who don't remember the taste of eggs because they were babies when the war started and now they're 3 or something. So they finally got to taste eggs. That's gone now. 25 World Food Program supported bakeries that really provided the main sustenance for people, which is bread, have all shut down now because they don't have flour. And the World Food Program says they have just a week left of supplies to support food kitchens, these hot kitchens where people clamor around with pots and pans for basically some soup made out of lentils or beans.
Are aid groups talking about the day they hit zero? Like, we don't have anything here?
They are sounding the alarm right, left, and center if you just listen. Like, if people just listen, like they're saying, we're running out of food, we're running out of food stocks, the bakeries have shut down. This is not something that's inevitable. This is a gradual catastrophe coming. It's clearly coming. We're seeing hospitals now also saying they're starting to run out of anesthesia and other medical supplies. So they are having to prioritize who gets the painkiller and who doesn't. Israel says this is to pressure Hamas. Israel says this is meant as a tactic to get them to, agree to their terms for a ceasefire. But we've heard international aid groups and even Israeli rights groups petitioning the Supreme Court saying this is collective punishment and this is against international law.
Well, we should say Israel denies that they're trying to intentionally starve people or that there's famine in Gaza, right?
Yeah, and I haven't seen anyone yet declare famine in Gaza at this stage, but what we've seen Israel's military division called Kogat, which is responsible for administering civilian affairs in Gaza and getting that aid in, saying that there's plenty of food in Gaza. But when you see the World Food Program saying the 25 bakeries that are supporting 800,000 people or more a day have had to shut down because we don't have flour, saying we don't have food, we're running out. When I talked to my colleague there who's a producer saying, I can't find food on the market, I haven't had eggs in weeks, there's nothing to buy. When you see the number of children who are malnourished and seeking malnutrition treatment in clinics, and those clinics themselves running out. I just got off the phone with UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund. They're telling me they have just a month left of therapeutic milk and supplies for something like 400 babies. There are definitely more than 400 babies that need this kind of treatment. So they are running out of supplies.
Yeah. I mean, we should say, this has happened before. It just seems like maybe it's worse now. And in the past, my understanding of what's happened is when Gaza has had incredibly limited food supplies, when there have been blockades of aid, the United States has stepped in and said, hey, we got to fix this, right?
Yeah, this happened at the beginning of the war. There was a full siege on Gaza for around 2.5 weeks, and President Biden did step in and ensured that aid starts to come in through Egypt, through the Rafah crossing there. We're not seeing that from the Trump administration, any calls for aid to come in or any change of course on that action. And this is the longest blockade of food, fuel, medical supplies, tents, anything coming in of the war. It's 5 weeks now.
You know, you alluded to this system that Israel is supposed to have to coordinate with aid groups, notify the military of their movements, things like that. COGAT, the coordination of government activities in the territories. Where are they in all of this? Are they just standing down?
So when it comes to the coordination of aid movements in Gaza, what the aid groups are saying is that they used to be able to coordinate their movements within Gaza with Israel's military and tell them we're going to go from point A to point B. So, we're telling you this so that you don't, hit us, hit our car, thinking it's something else. You don't end up with the world's central kitchen disaster where their workers were killed. But what we've been told is that since the renewal of war again, since the ceasefire was shattered by Israel, that they don't allow them to communicate their coordination in that way anymore. That system no longer exists. And when we asked NPR, my colleagues and I, we asked the Israeli military about that. They said, well, this hasn't been around since the ceasefire because we didn't need it during the ceasefire, and that now we coordinate movements based on the situation. That was their response. But we've seen, the UN guest house, which is a physical permanent structure whose location is very well known, hit by what the UN says was an Israeli tank, and a UN worker was killed, and 6, I believe, were wounded, some of them with amputations.
So aid isn't getting in. Aid workers are dying. And if you want to be providing aid in Gaza, there's no one for you to coordinate with to prevent some kind of strike on your people when they're going in to provide aid.
And your aid is dwindling. You're depleting your aid, so you don't have that much aid left to distribute. The supplies are running out. And so that all leads to the question of, is the risk of being there worth it to your life and to the life of your staff if there's nothing for them to provide anymore? These are questions unanswered, and every day that goes by, resources are running out in Gaza.
We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
I'm Courtney Martin from How To. On our latest episode, a new kind of road rage.
Just a nice older woman kind of motioning me to pull up beside her. And she's like, F you, sell your car. And I was like, I want to. I've been trying to. I've been looking. And she goes, just do it.
This week on the show, how to replace your Tesla and avoid all those drive-by F-bombs. Listen to How To wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey there, Slate listeners. This is Felix Salmon of Slate Money. You have been looking at the price of eggs. I have been looking at the price of eggs. And basically, Slate Money has now become a delivery mechanism for the greatest segment in Slate Money history, which is Egg Watch. Pretty much every week these days, we bring on the great Shana Roth to talk about eggs.
Where I live in Michigan, eggs are currently about $5 a dozen, but at a tiny little grocery store in Bay City, Michigan, where my parents live, they reported to me that they got eggs for $2.75 a dozen.
What?
Or what is idiosyncratic about the egg supply chain. They don't vaccinate their chickens against the flu. Whether you're a human or a chicken, you should have a flu vaccine, but the chickens don't get their flu vaccines. So follow Slate Money and join us every week for Egg Watch, along with all the rest of the latest business and finance news of the week, wherever you get your podcasts.
I want to ask you kind of a big question. You talked a little bit ago about the goals of the war in Gaza. And from the beginning, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, the stated goal for this war is to disable Hamas, have the hostages returned. But I'm kind of wondering, listening to you, do you think the goals of the war have changed in some way?
I have seen goalposts shift and change throughout the war, and the rhetoric constantly expand and change. Yes. If you look at what the Israeli government is saying, there are very clear indications that there are multiple goals at the current moment. One of them is the full adoption of President Trump's plan of permanent displacement for Palestinians living in Gaza. Israel's government fully embraced that as official policy, so no longer relegated to the fringe far right of Israeli society and settlement supporters, but even people in the mainstream in the government now fully backing this. They've created departments within the government to facilitate the transfer of Palestinians out of Gaza. So that's certainly one aim that they have clearly stated. Another is expansion of territory, so taking over more land from Gaza to create a larger, what they call security buffer zone, so taking over more of Gaza's territory. So these are also aims that we've seen that have been added that haven't been previously announced as official policy, but in recent weeks we've seen that also becoming part of the plan.
That's all surprising to me because moving Palestinians out of Gaza would require other countries to take Palestinians in, which they've been hesitant to do. That seems like a goal that's hard to achieve. But you're saying Israel wants to proceed with it anyway.
Yeah, they are proceeding with it. They call it voluntary migration. A plan of voluntary migration. And it's not hard to see how that might work for many people who don't see a future in Gaza right now. Their kids haven't been in school in a year and a half, if they still have all their children alive. They're all hungry. They don't have homes. They don't have electricity. They don't have running water. They're exposed to all kinds of disease and filth and infestation and diarrhea and stomach ailments and can't get their cancer treatment, can't get their high blood pressure medication, can't get, even women, Mary, can't get sanitary pads to deal with their periods. They're either having to take, period blockers, or they're having to take, just rip up tents. I did a story on this early in the war. It's a very, very, very difficult life, one that we cannot imagine living for a week, much less a year and a half. And so there are many people who may take the opportunity to leave somewhere if given the chance. But there are so many others who also would like to stay and rebuild their homes if given the chance, and would like to rebuild their schools, and even maybe just leave for treatment, but to be able to come back and see Gaza thrive.
There is another plan out there which envisions a future for Gaza without Palestinian displacement. It's Egypt's plan.
Now, Egypt's plan is not a final plan or the perfect plan. It's an initial plan. It's a detailed plan for reconstruction that calls for ways of rebuilding Gaza with Palestinians remaining there, not being forcibly expelled to Egypt, Jordan, or other countries. And it also includes like a kind of a vision for like a political transitional period in which Hamas does not have any role in government. The sticky part, and the part that no one has really been able to, I would say, bridge the difference on, is this idea that Israel says it has to see happen too. And I think I've also heard it from the Emiratis, and I believe there's other Gulf countries that back this, which is, how do you disarm Hamas? And what does disarming look like? Does it mean every single rifle, every single rocket launcher? Does it mean like no militants ever, no fighters ever? Because we've seen in the West Bank, that that's not possible. There's still somehow, people even just throwing stones, right? Fighting with weapons somehow. So I don't know how you reach that point without a political plan in place and an alternative vision for Gaza that allows for some semblance of hope and stability. Because also Arab countries, they don't want to spend billions of dollars into rebuilding the Gaza Strip only for another war to break out 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now. And that's why when I was in Egypt talking to people about their plan, I was in Cairo and I was speaking to the people drafting this plan, the minds behind it. They were telling me, as crazy and as far-fetched as this seems, we have to keep pushing for a two-state solution. And I would say to them, how are you even talking about two states right now? It seems so remote. And they'd say, because there's no other solution. There's no other alternative for the future besides this that would work and bring us all together. I've heard from, Emirati officials and others too, even those with ties with Israel. A two-state solution is something that many people want to see.
Yeah, it's interesting when Israel imagines this future for Gaza where Palestinians leave now and there's some kind of rebuilding. Is a two-state solution even part of what they envision, or it's just straightforwardly, this is all Israel?
So, the thing about Israel, there's such a wide variety of opinion, right? You've got people in Israel who truly do believe in this two-state solution, but, in different ways. It's different parameters, different conditions. But the current Israeli leadership and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he said openly during this war that he is protecting Israel from the creation of a Palestinian state. That's how he has, essentially explained his position for opposition to one.
So a hard no on two states.
Very hard no.
We're talking on Monday. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to be meeting with Donald Trump today. They're going to talk about tariffs, but I'm sure Gaza will be on the agenda too. It sounds like part of what you're saying here is that their agendas have become increasingly one over the last couple of months. Even though I'm sure my listeners will remember this press conference where it seemed like Donald Trump surprised Benjamin Netanyahu with this announcement of, I think we should rebuild Gaza, get the Palestinians out, rebuild it, make a beautiful, Riviera sort of vision. You're saying over the last few weeks, it's just become...
They've officially adopted as formal policy the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. That's how I would sum it up.
That's like shocking to me. Just as someone who's covered this over the last 2 years, I just imagine it must surprise you as well.
I think more what has surprised me is the level of destruction of the Gaza Strip today. But I remember even from the very beginning being on the phone with Gaza and people in Gaza and them telling me, this is different. This feels different. Everything around us is shaking. The earth is shaking. And I remember talking to a woman those early days who I connected with. She was trying to protect her 2 children. And she was telling me, I just tell them to run under the couch because I don't know where else we should go. I don't know what to do. She ended up moving a couple weeks later to central Gaza following evacuation orders to leave Gaza City. And by the end of October, on October 31st, her 2 kids, her husband, and 20 members of her family were killed in an airstrike on a building. And that is how this war is so different. And that is the kind of thing that surprises me because so many people that you know or that you've met or that you talk to end up being killed. This woman that I told you I met or I spoke to was killed in this airstrike. The only survivor in that apartment was her sister. She lost all her 6 children. She was sitting by the window with her newborn baby on her lap. All 6 of her children were killed, her parents, her siblings. Only she survived. Her husband wasn't at the building when that happened, so he was alive. I've stayed in touch with a brother of hers in London, in the UK, who told me that just before the ceasefire had begun in January, this husband was at a place in Gaza City to charge his phone. Like he went to, there's specific places where you can find electricity, you pay money like solar panels or whatever, and you can charge your phone. And it was struck and he lost his leg. So what I'm saying is like the levels of trauma, the layers of trauma that people are enduring and faced with is unimaginable. And I think that to me is the surprising thing, is that just how long this has gone on for and just how much people have lost.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for your time and your reporting. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Batrawy is an international correspondent leading NPR's Gulf Bureau in Dubai. She's been covering Israel's war in Gaza. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige, Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Madeline Ducharme, and Ethan Oberman. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. You can go track me down on Blue Sky, say hello. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.